Council, thank you. I am Patricia Krieg. It is obvious from the actions of the City Council that they are trying to retroactively justify their decision to rush the deployment of 5G, a decision they made without any input from the public. The city has hired Dr. Bushberg, a known industry mouthpiece since the 90s, to try to mislead the public into thinking that 5G will be safe. Our group requested an opportunity to deliver our own presentation. This request was denied. Our group asked for a copy of the invoice to know exactly how many thousands of dollars Dr. Bushberg was paid for his participation. This information has not been provided. So as usual, restricted to 2-minute presentations, our group will be presenting information showing why Dr. Bushberg cannot be trusted. We will present information showing definitively that the FCC is completely controlled by the wireless industry and their safety standards are inadequate. We will present information showing how many other cities, states, and countries recognize the health and environmental impact of 5G radiation and the steps they have taken to protect against it. Lastly, our group will present testimony from other leading experts who have the opposite opinion of Dr. Bushberg and the wireless industry, claiming that 5G presents a very clear threat to the health of Sacramento and to people around the world. These experts include highly respected physicians and scientists with prestigious positions, such as senior researchers for the National Institute of Health, which is the primary agency of the United States government responsible for public health research, as well as advisors to the World Health Organization and the International Association for Research on Cancer, 2 of the world's leading authorities on health. Everything presented today will be submitted to the public record.
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete. Our next speaker is Dan Topowski, then Hannah Mcmahon, then Maria Kelly.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council members, City Manager, and City Clerk. Dan Piskowski. I'm an arborist, and I'm here tonight on behalf of Trees for Sacramento. What you have on the photo here that's a boring machine. And as arborists, we teach everyone, don't plant a tree on top of an underground utility. Don't plant a tree on top of it. What are we doing here? We're putting the 5G conduit down the park strip under the trees. The concern here is they say it's going to be deep. Well, when it hits roots and hit root masses, it comes up on the surface. Just a couple weeks ago, I was working at a person's yard down in the Greenhaven Pocket area. You know how deep the conduit was? 8 inches below the concrete. Concrete's only 4 inches thick, so it's right up on the surface. And so what's going to happen is you put the conduit in a park strip, you're not going to be able to grind the stump on the tree. When the tree gets cut down, you can't grind it because if you cut the fiber optics, it's really expensive. The other concern is right here. This is 500 N Street. You can see the box they put there right next to the tree. Look at how close it is. It's like less than a foot away. That's a London plane tree. It's going to get 3 times as big. So what's going to happen? It's going to destroy the box. The utility calls the city. Urban Forestry puts a removal sign on it and says unsustainable site. Out comes the tree. We just lost another space. And this is just one example. There's these empty tree wells downtown. They don't plant in the summer, which is a good idea. They're dropping all these boxes in these empty tree wells. That means we're losing the space for the tree forever. And we all know about climate change, and the downtown, we need as many trees as we can. And they really need to rethink this. What Trees for Sacramento is asking, we know we can't move the conduit now. It's underneath the park strips. But in these tree wells, we want them to move the boxes so we can grow a street tree. And that's what we're asking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Hannah Mcmahon. Following Hannah is Maria Kelly, then Rorke Vane, and Eric Windheim.
First of all, the measurements presented today were significantly lower than measurements we have taken with our own equipment and measurements from an independent expert we hired. Gerald Bushberg has repeatedly claimed that exposure from the antennas in our neighborhood is low, but low compared to what? Compared to exposure from other wireless devices, including previous generations and antennas, our exposure is actually very high. Measurements inside our home show exposure can be as high as 460,000 microwatts per square meter. The engineering report performed by Waterford Consulting, the same firm used by the city and Verizon, shows that exposure at our second story can be as high as 25% of the FCC limits, or 2.5 million microwatts per square meter. Comparatively, exposure at the homes nearest the 4G antenna on top of Kennedy High School show exposure limits of 500 to 1,000 microwatts per square meter, 460 to 920 times lower than exposure inside my daughter's bedroom. Even though the antenna at Kennedy is more powerful, like most previous generation antennas, it was installed higher above the ground and further away from the nearest homes. Measurements taken right next to my cell phone showed exposure levels at 5,000 microwatts per square meter while making a call. Measurements right next to our Wi-Fi router showed exposure levels of 10,000 microwatts per square meter. The exposure from the antennas in our area is going to dwarf exposure from all other wireless devices compared for individuals that are unfortunate enough to have an antenna installed near their home. So I ask again, exposure from the antennas is low compared to what? Compared to FCC limits, and that is all. Thank you.
Next speaker is Maria Kelly.
Good evening, everyone. Electromagnetic radiation pollution is a known hazard to human health and safety, as we're hearing tonight from some of the attendees, including unrepaired damage to DNA. I urge you to put the health and safety of your sons and your daughters and every child you know at the top of the list of your values, voice, and vote. 5G facilities do not belong in our parks. Parks must be safe, clean zones, free from 5G. Our parks are for people and trees. Our children need to play among the trees, free from phones and tablets. We could all benefit from enjoying our parks disconnected from technology. I believe that you, each of us here tonight has, in the words of Dr. Carl Jung, the eternal right to freedom and the equally eternal duty to individual responsibility. We have the right and responsibility to protect our families, our lives, our homes, our neighborhoods. We each must do all that is humanly possible to protect the health and safety of our community and to protect the generations to come. Do not deploy 5G in our neighborhoods. Please put the health and safety of everyone you love at the top of your list. Please keep the health and safety of everyone you love at the top of your list. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Rorke Vane, then Eric Windheim, then Anna Sue.
Okay, good evening. I'm here to talk about New Hampshire. Just last month, New Hampshire passed a bill establishing a commission to study environmental and health effects of the evolving 5G technology. This commission, this is another state, is tasked with answering a series of very important questions about the safety of 5G. Some of these questions are as follows. Why has the insurance industry, who recognizes wireless radiation as a leading risk, why are there exclusions in the policies not covering damages caused by the pathological properties of 5G and electromagnetic radiation? Why do cell phone manufacturers in the legal section within the device keep saying that the phone must be at least 5 millimeters from the body? Everybody uses the phone against their ear. Very few people use it on speaker. Some people use it with a headphone. You still get radiation through the headphone. Why have thousands of peer-reviewed studies, including a recently published U.S. toxicology program, 16-year, $30 million study showing a wide range of statistically significant DMA damage, brain and heart tumors, infertility, and so many other ailments being ignored by the FCC? Why are the FCC sanctioned guidelines for public exposure to wireless radiation only based on thermal effect on the temperature of the skin and do not account for the non-thermal, non-ionizing biological effects of wireless radiation? That's because it was designed that way to ignore that. Why are the FCC radio frequency exposure limits set for the United States 100 times higher than other countries like Russia, China, Italy, Switzerland, and most of the Eastern Europe? Seems everyone realizes the problems with 5G and the FCC regulating it. Everyone except the wireless companies in the cities such as Sacramento that have gotten in bed with those wireless companies refuse to recognize it. I'd also like to tell you, don't ignore the canary in the cave. Abigail spoke about the problem she and her sister experienced.
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete. Eric Windheim and then Anna Sue.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Eric Windheim. I am a building biologist and electromagnetic radiation specialist, trained and certified by the International Institute for Building Biology and Ecology. People hire me and fly me all over the country. I want to talk to you about something a little different right now. I was looking at the TV recently, and then I looked at the recorded link. When Mr. Bushberg, there was a channel, CBS 13 broadcast, and there's confusing media information on this video. It says the city commissioned an independent report by PUC Professor Gerald Bushberg, right? And so then Professor Bushberg says, so if you were to exceed the threshold, you'd have to hug the antenna, and you'd have to climb up the pole and grab the antenna. And by his own admission, the public limit was at 48 inches for the 4G antennas. And by this drawing right here, you can see that the blue 100% to 500% of the limit extends out 12.7 feet horizontally. And when you get to the 500 to 5,000% limit, it's 4 feet. So I would like to have a Public Records Act request for his slideshow while it's still available to analyze that. Maybe it's just a point of confusion because I know the professor was talking about standards, limits, and thresholds. But the fact is, the public exposure limit is the MPE for the public. And I'd like to talk with you further, but I'm just wondering, is this an unjust taking of these people's right to enjoy their property? I want you to think about that. But this report was done by Waterford, and they've done a lot of reports for the city, so they're entirely credible. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Anna. Following Anna is Theodore Lonskew, and then Cindy Lee.
Hello, Mayor, Council members, Mr. Jennings, thank you. So we are being told that Dr. Bushberg tells us 5G is going to be safe because it is supposedly under the levels supplied by the FCC. Unfortunately, the FCC is not a reliable witness. The FCC is a captured agency. It's not the only captured agency in the United States. This is the publication that an earlier speaker referred to. Essentially, an agency is captured when the wireless industry, in this case, uses its money and its lobbyists to gain control of the regulation of the regulatory agency so that they can control the way that their industry is handled by the federal government. You can see this in the actions taken by the FCC in the past several years. They have been stripping the rights away from local governments and deregulating the restrictions placed on telecom companies. The FCC has been particularly active in the last few years pursuing a deregulatory agenda, probably in anticipation of a pushback against 5G. They want to make sure that we, the people, are disarmed before they bring out this new technology. You can look at the personnel that make up the FCC, like a lot of other captured agencies. The top brass are mostly former wireless industry employees or lobbyists, including Ajit Pai, who is currently the FCC chairman, is a former Verizon attorney. If you want to have an idea of what can go wrong when we have agency capture, I have 3 words for you. They are Boeing 737 MAX. When the FAA got a little bit too cozy with Boeing, you end up having problems. This has occurred in many different industries in the United States. Finally, with reference to, I'm going to run out of time. Okay, thank you, and I don't want to be guinea pig.
Thank you.
Wait.
Our next speaker is Theodore Loneskew, then Cindy Lee.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council and officers. I'm a healthcare practitioner. I'm a dentist. I'm concerned with health. And I'm going to read from a recent article in The Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. This is pertaining the electromagnetic fields as they apply to 5G. A discussion on the rapid global proliferation of artificial electromagnetic fields would now be apt. The most notable is the blanket of radio frequency electromagnetic radiation, largely microwave radiation generated for wireless communication and surveillance technologies, as mounting scientific evidence suggests that prolonged exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic radiation has serious biological and health effects. However, public exposure regulations in most countries continue to be based on the guidelines of the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection and Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, which were established in the 1990s on the belief that only acute thermal effects are hazardous. Prevention of tissue heating by radio frequency electromagnetic radiation is now proven to be ineffective in preventing biochemical and physiological interference. For example, acute non-thermal exposure has been shown to alter human brain metabolism by NIH scientists, electrical activity in the brain, and systemic immune responses. Chronic exposure has been associated with increased oxidative stress, DNA damage, and cancer risk. Laboratory studies, including large rodent studies by the U.S. National Toxicology Program and Ramazzini Institute of Italy, confirm this biological and health.
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete.
Thank you for my time.
Next speaker is Cindy Lee, then Noah Davidson.
Last Wednesday, Elk Grove City Council voted to implement 5G in Elk Grove. This was a process that took over 2 years to analyze and complete. During the meeting, council members acknowledged the health risk posed by the radiation emissions from the antennas that would be installed near their constituents' homes. They appeared to weigh these risks very heavily and even commented that they were uncomfortable making a decision that would greatly impact the health of Elk Grove's residents. They also acknowledged that they were somewhat restricted in their decision-making process by FCC regulations, something that most of us here today find absolutely appalling. Eventually, they voted in favor of the contract with AT&T, but simultaneously implemented a zoning ordinance, to restrict placement of cell antennas directly adjacent to front yards. This decision was significantly reduce exposure for most Elk Grove residents. I think it's unfair to individuals living at the end of streets where these antennas will be installed, but there's a clear example of a city exercising local authority to protect their constituents. At least 25 other U.S. cities have passed similar ordinance. New Hampshire recently passed a bill to investigate the safety of 5G. Cities in Italy, Switzerland, the UK, and Belgium have all taken actions to protect their residents, specifically from the increased levels of radiation 5G will bring. Why has Sacramento not done the same? Why does Sacramento think they know better than all these cities throughout the world? That they know better than the hundreds of doctors and scientists warning about the dangers of 5G? Their decision, your decision, may have serious effects on our health in the city of Sacramento. Thank you.
Next speaker is Noah Davidson. Following Noah is Patty Lukowitz, then Melinda Johnson.
So the measurements presented by the city represent just a moment in time and will vary based on usage of the antenna. I imagine they were taken during business hours when usage is lowest. These measurements are also significantly lower than measurements that multiple residents have taken with their own equipment, as well as measurements taken by independent experts that we have hired. We'll provide you these measurements to the record. Dr. Bushberg has clearly demonstrated his willingness to mislead the public. This is evidenced best by his CBS 13 interview given last week here at City Council. In this interview, Bushberg states, so if you were to exceed the threshold, you'd have to hug the antenna, you'd have to climb up the pole, grab a hold of the antenna. It is unclear from the context of the article exactly which antenna he is referring to, but our group has obtained engineering reports for all of the antennas in the Pocket Greenhaven area, and for half of these antennas, the area around the antenna can exceed the FCC general population's safety limit. The limit that pertains to us residents extends out 12 to 17 feet horizontally and down 5 feet vertically. Here's a page from that report. Another incredibly misleading statement from Bushberg's CBS 13 interview is as follows, quote, because these are directional antennas, the energy is focused out towards the horizon, not downward where people are. Hello? That has been our primary complaint throughout this entire process, that the antennas are being installed at roughly the same height as our second-story homes, and we will be living directly in or very close to the main transmission beam where Bushberg confirms exposure is highest. What's worse, most of the light poles in our area are even lower heights than the light poles on Pocket Road and other main streets. Here's some examples. When the antennas are installed on these lower light poles, they will be directly in line with people's second stories.
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete.
Long-standing financial ties to the industry
Thank
and
you for
his
your
willingness to twist the truth to suit his message, there is no way Sacramento.
Our next speaker is Patty Lukowitz, then Melinda Johnson. Patty Lukowitz.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The city's presented a lot of information today, but one thing they did not present was the long-term studies of specific conditions 5G will subject us to. They talked about a lot of moments in time and things of that such, but not a long-term study that shows that my family living in that zone in 10 years, will I be back saying, this is a problem that we decided 10 years ago? For months, our group has been requesting Verizon from the FCC and from the city of Sacramento scientific studies that showed these specific conditions we are being subjected to are safe long-term. None of the groups have been able to provide the evidence. The reason is simple, it doesn't exist. Put simply, there's been zero studies on the long-term, and I keep emphasizing long-term health effects of 5G. Sacramento is the first line in this experiment. This is best evidenced by Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. At a Senate Commerce hearing in February, Senator Blumenthal said that his research, that he has reached out to the FCC and the FDA requesting evidence that 5G was safe. Both organizations failed to do so. At the hearing, he questioned wireless executives about research on 5G. The executives admitted that there was zero on safety of 5G. Blumenthal concluded that we are flying blind with regards to health and safety for 5G deployment. I would ask, I heard tonight somebody mentioned that ethics standards are to be developed. Was that you, City Manager? I'm not sure. Somebody said something about the aesthetic standards to be developed. I'm wondering why do they need to be developed? Why weren't they before this? Because one of the things you can rule on is the aesthetic standards, where a tower is placed. Okay. How were they tested? And Dr. Bushberg, can you provide evidence?
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete. Our next speaker is Melinda Johnson. Melinda Johnson, Eric Cabrera, and Mark Graham.
Okay. 5G is the world's largest biological experiment ever conducted. To conduct an experiment like this on citizens without our consent is unconstitutional. The last time large groups of humans were rounded up and experimented on, we know what happened. To expose humans against their will to 24/7 millimeter wave exposure proven to be damaging to DNA and cell structures is a crime against humanity. You have to ask yourself, why are so many people weighing in on this if it's safe? Now I'd like to read a little bit about Gerald Bushberg. He's one of the industry's favorite mouthpieces. He has consulted for the cellular industry and has been one of the leading defenders of cell phones and cell towers since at least 1993. Over the years, he has collected hundreds of thousands, or maybe even millions of dollars from the wireless industry itself, and governments looking for a way for a seal of approval to move forward with building out wireless infrastructure. Lo and behold, Bushberg is here again today to collect a check and tell us all we have nothing to worry about. Even though research in the field has changed drastically since the 1990s, Bushberg's message has not changed much at all. His message is fairly simple. There are no biological effects from non-ionizing radiation besides the thermal effects recognized by the FCC. You have to ask yourself, if this stuff is so harmless, why was it originally created as a crowd control weapon and crowd dispersal? That's where they got the idea for 5G.
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete. Our next speaker is Eric Cabrera. Following Eric is Mark Graham, then Juliet.
Good evening. One of the ways that the city has consistently tried to mislead the public is by saying the city has no authority to regulate the placement of these 5G antennas due to federal regulation. Federal regulation that applies to every city in the country, and yet to date, at least 25 cities in the U.S. have passed or proposed ordinances to limit or even prevent the placement of small cell antennas. Many of the cities specifically cited health concerns as a primary reason for passing their ordinances. In September 2018, the city of Mill Valley passed an ordinance to prohibit the placement of small cell antennas in residential areas. The ordinance clearly states that it was, quote, adopted to protect health, safety, and welfare. In July of 2018, the city of Petaluma passed a similar ordinance to prohibit placement of any small cell within 500 feet of any residence. It is not only in California cities taking action to protect the residents. The city of Mason, Ohio, has prohibited placement of small cell antennas within 100 feet of any residence. In Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the installation of 5G antennas has been completely stopped after residents voiced complaints about the antennas. Our group first informed the city of Sacramento of these other cities taking action to restrict the placement of small cell antennas in April. After the first time, the city of Sacramento tried to tell us their hands were tied due to federal regulation. We question how these other cities were able to regulate the placement of these antennas and why the city of Sacramento was claiming that Sacramento was unable to do the same. The city told us that they would look into it and get back to us. It has been over 4 months and we have gotten no answer. The real answer is quite simple.
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete. Our next speaker is Mark Graham, then Juliet Clemzrelli, then Pamela Marquez.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Mark Graham, and I live in Elk Grove. As Ms. Lukowitz said, you can control this. Last Wednesday, the city of Elk Grove amended its zoning code, and one of the things they put in place was that no cell antenna will be permitted immediately adjacent to the front yard of a home. If they can do it, you can do it. Mr. Mayor, will you look into that? Call Steve Lee, the mayor of Elk Grove, and ask him. Will you look into that, please? Thank you. What does C95.1 really say? This is the IEEE standard that the FCC regulations are based on, okay? So this is key to understand. This is what Dr. Bushberg failed to tell you. This is the full name of the standard. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. You should each have a copy of my slides, one page, double-sided. There's a copy for the city clerk. Standard for safety levels. This is C95.1. Now, this is from Code of Federal Regulations, Title 47. It's from the FCC. It says they're based on this standard, the IEEE standard. Okay, that's the connection between the FCC guidelines and the standard. What does it say? The scope. This is the first sentence of C95.1. It's supposed to protect against established adverse health effects in human beings. It also says on the first page, the purpose of the standard is to protect against established adverse effects to human health. So what is their definition of an established adverse health effect? It's right there. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the point is consensus in the scientific community. That means if there's one study that does not find a given health effect, then there's no consensus and there never will be. These are the only 4 effects that the IEEE says are so-called established adverse health effects. Just these 4. I'm not going to read them to you, but again, you have a copy. So when Dr. Bushberg says that the FCC standards are to protect against children and they're safe for everybody, that is a lie. It's only to protect against these 4 established adverse health effects. Does Dr. Bushberg know this? Either he doesn't and he should, or he knows it and he chose not to tell you.
Thank you, sir.
The next speaker is Juliet, and I believe it's Clemsrelli. Juliet. I don't see Juliet. Pamela Marquez, then Julie Ostich.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Our group has obtained testimony from a number of different highly respected experts, including senior researchers for the National Institutes of Health and advisors to the World Health Organization. These experts share the exact opposite opinion of Gerald Bushberg, that 5G constitutes a very clear threat to the health of Sacramento residents. Their opinion is supported by literally thousands of studies showing a variety of negative health effects at levels far below the FCC safety limits. Unfortunately, we do not have time to read through all these expert testimonies, but we will submit them to the public record, and members of the press or public can obtain these testimonials from our group at 5gawarenessnow@gmail.com. Thank you.
And our final speaker is Julie Ostich. Ostowich.
My name is Julie Ostowich. I'm not going to talk about the corruption of the FCC because you've heard a lot about it, and that was going to be my opening piece, but I will say that 5G small cell transmitters are an impingement on local property owners' rights. They're violating our right to privacy. They're violating our right to protect our family and loved ones from the proven harmful effects of wireless radiation. Well, we have experts that saying there's no proof that there's harm, but we have plenty of studies that show that there is harm. And just to bring up an old issue is the smart meter issue. I was harmed by smart meters. I lobbied heavily with our local SMUD agency to have it removed from my home. Following removal of that device from my home, I was able to sleep again, the ringing in my ears went away, and I had a bit of peace, except at work. I work at the UC Davis Medical Center with Dr. Bushberg for many, many years. And suddenly I came to work and I'm having those same symptoms at work, exact same symptoms. I'm like, what the heck is going on? Well, they installed Wi-Fi and they put up small cell antenna transmitters for their paging systems. So suddenly at work, I'm having ringing in the ears, heart palpitations. I have to wear a hat. I'm not wearing it right now, but I have a special baseball cap that I wear all the time because it protects me from that somewhat. But now you want to put these things in our neighborhoods where we live. And I was very much grateful that I was able to get the smart meter removed from my home. We do not have Wi-Fi in my home because I'm extremely sensitive to it. When my son sneaks his little laptop and puts the Wi-Fi on, I know that what's going on because I have suddenly this horrible ringing in my ears that I did go to the doctors for repeatedly prior to knowing that it was a smart meter that was causing it. And now I know it's Wi-Fi. So my closing statement is that there is a validation of harm existing. And the CIA recently came out with telling us that Cuba and the China embassy were both harmed by wireless radiation attacks. That
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete.
Thank you.
And there was one speaker slip I couldn't read, Giulietti. Nope. Okay, thank you. That concludes our public testimony.
Thank you all for coming tonight and for the thoroughness of your testimony. Councilmember Jennings, how would you like to proceed?
I think it would probably be best if we took all the questions down tonight. I'm sure we can go back on the tape and record them, and then have Dr. Bushberg answer the questions in a way that we can then put it up on the website, and then that can continue a meaningful discussion. If we try to do all that tonight, I think it might get to be a back and forth type of question and answer, and I don't know that this chamber is prepared to do that that type of interaction. So that would be my suggestion. I'm open to other suggestions that may be proposed.
All right, Councilmember Ashby.
Not sure I have a suggestion so much as just a kind of a question, or it was a lot of information tonight between what Maria presented and what Susanna said and doctor and the community's concerns. And so I was here when we voted for 5G, and I just don't remember there being any conversation around this at all. And
Excuse.
Hold tight, okay? I don't remember us having any reason to have the conversation at that point that we knew of. But it seems clear to me that we should have. And I had always been told during this, as this was coming up, because as you know, Rick, there's a few of these coming from my district too, a few inquiries like this similar. And as I have reached out to Maria and Susanna, the thing that I had been told was that we weren't sure about our ability to change our regulations on where we could put them, and how much of this was, regulated by the federal government and not us, and all those things. And so I am really glad to see us bringing forward some of those answers and getting some information. And while I recognize that nothing we do here is going to make everyone happy, because there are a lot of people I do remember on the 5G night that there were a ton of people very excited about what that meant in terms of progress for businesses and access and people. And there is a whole nother side to this discussion. There is. And
Excuse me, sir, one more time I'm going to ask you to leave. That's the third time I'm not going to ask you again. You're going to leave next time you shut up.
And so I guess my question really, Maria and Susanna, is for you. It seems to me as I sit here and weigh through the information that we're receiving now, though I wish we would have done this in a reverse order. This is where we are now, and we need to have the conversation. So Rick, thanks for pushing it forward. And you did have to push. I think it's very reasonable to ask us to look into some type of code or ordinance that limits where these new modules are placed. So what are we or can we do, like Elk Grove, as was suggested, or other cities in California, create or modify our ordinance to limit the sort of easement of these entities on people's property or right in front of their homes? What opportunity do we have there? Whichever one of you is more appropriate to answer.
Okay, well, council members, part of our due diligence at the request of the council to look into this, we actually did a pretty exhaustive review of what every city in the nation, certainly, I don't think we've gone international yet, but has been doing in response to 5G deployment. And we had law clerks look at it, one of our senior attorneys look at it, and prepared a report of possible ideas, expecting that at some point the council might ask us to take a look at it. I spoke to the Elk Grove city attorney myself to determine what they were doing. They were very interested in following Sacramento's lead in 5G deployment. 5G Sacramento is a pilot city, which means a lot of cities are learning from us. And so it would be appropriate for us as we do a second wave of implementation to now look at these other issues that the city could potentially do, like a zoning ordinance or other public works, which Maria McGonigal mentioned at the start of her presentation.
So what would be a time frame on something like that to come back to us? I mean, the thing about a pilot, no matter what it is, technology, or we do lots of pilot work here in Sacramento. We're try to be innovative, but when you find areas for improvement or where changes need to be made, you have to take that opportunity. So this looks like potentially one of those opportunities. So what would be our time frame